So who are we? We are Fathom, which is a platform to understand people. In particular, we use advanced text analytics to help you get really accurate and actionable themes and insights out of your open-ended questions. And so the reason we're talking today about mixed methodology survey design to be able to leverage AI is because as powerful as Fathom is and all sorts of other tools are, it's also really critically important, as always, to be designing with that intention in mind. Fathom is going to be able to help you save time and resources. It's going to really provide that deep understanding of your open ends embedded in surveys, from transcription, from other places. It's going to give you those customized nuance insights and help you drive decision making. But all of that is dependent, of course, or at least partially dependent on a really strong survey design that sets you up for success and analysis. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Individually, as practitioners, I should have said, my name is Tova. I am one of the co-founders of Fathom. I'm sorry, I just jumped right into the good stuff. My co-founder, Micaiah, who's also an I, together have done probably more open-ended research at scale than anyone. We did a lot of that in our previous organization, where we were market researchers, public opinion researchers, working on really complex issues and guiding just a ton of research doing exactly this, that mixed methodology, open at scale, lots of open-ended questions in those mixed methodology instruments. We've led response on emerging national crises, from COVID to the attack on the Capitol, processed 30 million open-ended responses through the Fathom platform, with just a ton of detail, accuracy, and actionability, and launched Fathom in 2023 publicly, so that you could subscribe and so that you could also leverage that platform. Fathom's currently being used by leading brands and agencies to cut coding time by about 85% and increase the nuance and accuracy. And so it's taking all of that learning that Micaiah and I have had as individual practitioners and researchers for the last decade, and all of the learning that we've had processing so much open-ended data that we're now pulling into this community of practice and into this webinar in particular to share with you. So let's dive in. Thank you, by the way, Micaiah. This is our community of practice. Thank you for telling me that wasn't working. Let's dive in. Designing powerful mixed method surveys to leverage AI. So I think we're all aware that there are advances in data collection capabilities, advances in text analytics, and those things are unlocking new possibilities. The sort of distinction between does it need to be quant, does it need to be qual, is starting to blend, and there's just a ton of space. There's always been a space. Now there's even more space for mixed methodology magic. I think it's magic. It's my favorite thing, so I think it's magic. The kinds of instruments that allow us to do really advanced analytics that we would associate with quant, but also to be able to get the rich depth, the sort of nuanced stories and associations that we associate with qual. Anytime we're doing that, and I'm going to really focus on a mixed methodology survey, but these principles really sort of cut through the spectrum of mixed methodology. I know Micaiah talked about that last month. You can always access that webinar. It's on the website, what that spectrum might look like. And so these principles really address all of those, but I'm going to focus today primarily on survey. Our examples are going to be survey design, and that's what we're going to talk about the most. So the first principle we're going to talk about: design with research goals and an analysis plan in mind. I addressed this a little bit already at the very beginning, but I think one of the things that can sometimes be tempting is to say, well, we'll just give it to AI and get it to make sense of this open-ended data for us. And that will work to some extent, but it will be so much more powerful if you have a plan ahead of time for how you're going to do that. So we're going to talk about that. The second piece is to combine open and closed-ended questions for powerful analysis. I'm going to show you some of the ways that we can move from that design principle into analysis, what that enables for you to help to start to really strengthen that muscle around, okay, what do I want to cut by what? I know it is new and unusual to be able to do that. And so we want to talk about what are the ways that you're thinking about doing that? Obviously, we start to have all of the principles that have always been in place around bias, but they get bigger. So we want to really minimize bias by starting broad and getting narrower in focus. And really the biggest thing is an ordering thing. We'll talk about a couple of different kinds of bias, but we're going to really focus on ordering and how we build with an attention to that to minimize the bias that's going to show up in our open ends in particular. We want to be specific and focused with open-ended questions. Again, we have done a whole webinar on that in particular on the questions. You can always access that, but I'm going to touch on it briefly today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you build and test batteries that you can reuse and adapt, how you start to test those questions, test the order of questions, gain a lot of confidence in those things, and then are able to reuse those things. Principle number 1, designing with research goals and an analysis plan in mind. I promise there are not this many words on most of the slides, and I'm not going to belabor this because I know we've got a lot of really senior researchers here who absolutely do this absolutely every time, but I do want to highlight briefly the importance of ensuring that you're starting with a goal, a desired outcome for the organization, why the research needs to be conducted, what kinds of decisions you need to make with confidence that you can't today, and translating that into a research question. What's the question that you need to answer? What information do you need in order to make that decision with confidence? Are there hypotheses that you need to prove and disprove? That those things are going into your research design. Today, we're going to take for granted that your research design is a mixed methodology survey. And that's going to be the form that is best suited to answering the question. It might not always be. So you're making sure that those questions feed into design. You're considering depth versus scale. It's not the same as it's sort of the traditional trade-off where you need to pick one versus the other. But again, there's that spectrum of mixed methodology, that spectrum of intersection. And so where do you want to sit on that? And then taking into consideration constraints like time, cost, and what audience your platform is able to access. Fathom doesn't collect the data for you. We process data from any platform that you're gathering from. And so part of your research design is going to be what platform are you gathering from? All of that then goes into your mixed methodology survey design so that you can build an analysis plan that's going to answer the research question. You have the specific questions that you need to answer, and you're thinking about N size. That's going to start to weave in as we talk a little bit more about design today. But as you are starting to be able to go from your sample into specific segments and open-ended themes within those, N size starts to become really important. So how are you thinking about that? And you're thinking about your data quality and your respondent experience. There's a ton of conversation happening in our ecosystem right now about those two things. Lots of open-ended questions, when they're well designed, can really increase both the data quality and the respondent experience. And so you're thinking about how to do that, how to address those things to be able to get the best data you can. An example, super quick example. So maybe we want to stop the decline of membership renewals. Our research question then is what can be done to stop the decline of renewals? And specifically, we want to know, why are renewals declining? Is satisfaction declining? Who isn't and isn't satisfied, and why? What are the drivers of value, and would price make a difference? That means obviously we have a hypothesis that price would make a difference. Maybe we think it's related to the economy. We think that job loss is equal not renewing. We think that some people value the renewal a lot, but they're not quite enough when spending is tight. Okay, cool. Now we're at research design. So we want a mixed methodology survey. We know based on those questions that we have given ourselves a little bit of time and space to voice that we're going to want to measure satisfaction, drivers of value, satisfaction with price. We're going to want to know why, and we're going to want to understand specific experiences. And in our context, our hypothetical context that we're working through today, we need this information quickly so we can take action. And we want a sample size that's going to give us confidence to act. So we want to generate some hypotheses, but we want to have some strength behind them, some validity behind them, so that we can act and not need to go back into the field. Cool. I mean, that's a great example for a mixed methodology survey design because I created this example. So now we know we want to analyze by intent to renew, by drivers of value, by satisfaction, and by economic situation. That means we're going to want to make sure when we're thinking about designing that we can create really clear cuts of those things. And we want to surface, when we say surface, we're probably thinking more in the open ends there, the reasons for cancellation, the reasons for dissatisfaction, the drivers of the value, and considerations around price. And so that's starting right from that goal, stop membership decline, to, okay, what's the analysis plan and how am I ensuring that my mixed methodology design is going to enable me to be able to analyze that way? One of the things that's inherent in that is the second principle. We are going to combine open and closed-ended questions for really powerful analysis. I'm going to slow down a little bit here. I said that I was going to go quickly through the last section, and I did, but I'm going to slow down a little bit here because I think this is really the heart of what we want to be talking about today. So well-crafted, open-ended, or mixed methodology instruments create really powerful batteries. And when I say a battery, what I mean by that is a combination of open and closed-ended questions that hold together in order to answer one of your core research questions. I'll say that one more time. When I say battery, because I'm going to use that term over and over, I mean a combination of questions that hold together. They are part of an analysis plan together to be able to answer a core research question. You might also cross them and intersect them with some other things, but they're really going to hold together. And if I've got these pieces of things together, I'm going to be able to analyze and I'm going to be able to answer that core research question. Open ends are most powerful when they're combined with closed-ended questions, like multiple choice questions or Likert scales that enable branching and that enable segmentation. What I mean by that is that your follow-up can respond really directly to a multiple choice or to sometimes now in responsive survey design to something that somebody has told you. So you're able to follow that thread. And segmentation in analysis means that we can cut our open-ended questions by our closed-ended questions. That's going to really come to life if it's feeling a little bit mushy right this second when we look at examples. When we're doing that, though, we need to really watch out for priming effects because of things like recency bias and acquiescence bias and social desirability bias, all of those things that if we are telling people something, if we say, for example, give them multiple choice questions and then ask them an open-ended question, we've already primed them with a set of options. And so we really want to be thinking a lot about order and what kinds of effects and biases we're building into the survey through order. The last thing that we want to be able to do is combine behavioral or demographic data to be able to augment our analysis even further with segmentation, with the creation of personas, so we can really truly analyze qual, those open-ended responses, our verbatim responses, our why, the same way as we have previously quant, because we're going to have really, really clear metrics for the qual. We can analyze them in the same ways and we can cut them with all of that other data. One of the big questions then that comes up when we're looking at research design is, should the question that I want the answer to be a qual question or a quant question? And that's always obviously a little bit up to discretion, but there are a couple of really simple principles that lend themselves to either quant, a closed-ended question, or qual, an open-ended question. So in the quantitative, in the closed-ended questions, because we want to create a closed-ended segment, if we want to be able to segment by something, positionality, support, agreement, we probably want to quant a closed-ended metric for it. We want to be able to measure any of those things. We want to measure position, agreement, or support. We want to rank known options or priorities. So there you've got your sort of multiple choice or your ranked order, any of those sorts of pieces. And we want to measure effectiveness. Has this moved you? Have you been exposed to something and has it created a shift? All of those things also enable us to segment all of our open-ended questions. So maybe we want to map unprompted associations. What comes to mind when, what words and associations, what experiences, top of mind salience and brand recall, qualitative, again, what organizations, what products associated with. Surfacing unknown options or priorities. Sometimes we're not ready for a multiple choice. Maybe we're not ready to say like, okay, what's the distribution across those things? Because we don't know if we've got all the right things on the list. Understanding the why. This is probably the thing that is the most common, and we'll look at a bunch of different versions of why questions. Understanding narratives and experiences, just a more detailed version of why, but can surface really, really powerful things you didn't know to look for, and to map emotional associations, emotion being a key driver of decision making. So here's an example, and most of the rest of this, we're going to bring things to life with examples as opposed to talking about in principles. So here's an example of an attitude change and an understanding drivers of change battery. Remember a battery, a couple of questions that hold together to give you a really powerful insight into something. So this is an attitude shift structure. We might ask a question like, to what degree do you believe that this concept is true? How does the belief today compare to the past? And what specifically has happened to change your belief? There's our open-ended. When we translate that into any context, and you're going to see as we move through today, we're going to have consumer insights contexts, we're going to have market research contexts, we're having public opinion polling contexts. The structure actually works in any context. So let's look at this one. How much do you agree or disagree that AI is good for humanity? Closed-ended. This is our to what degree question. 4 points, strongly agree to disagree. How does your perception of AI today compare to what you thought 5 years ago? So no change, shifted towards it being good, towards it not being good, more conflicted than I was 5 years ago. And what specifically have you experienced or seen that has changed your belief? There's our open why. I want to note that it doesn't ask why. It asks what specifically have you experienced? And that's really building on one of the past webinars, one of the things we've talked about before about the narrowed focus of a why question, being really focused on what it is that you really need to know and understand. So what have you experienced or seen that has changed your belief? That's our open why. Then I have this fun section down below called fun analysis to understand drivers of change. So here's some of the things we can do with this data, with this 3-question battery. So first we can code the open-ended question and get all of the detailed themes and out of that piece. Themes, sub-themes, ton of detail. Then we can create a segment that is strongly agree and shifted towards AI being good and make that segment. And then we can explore our open-ended why. What have those people experienced or seen that has moved them towards AI being good? And we can do the same thing on the other side. Let's combine strongly disagree and shifted towards AI not being good. Obviously, there's all sorts of other concoctions that we could come up with and explore their open-ended why. What has shifted those people who now feel most strongly that it's bad? What has shifted them? What have they experienced or seen? And then similarly, look at the conflicted segment and explore their open-ended why. So you can see here how this really, really simple 3-question battery enables us to understand what is moving people towards or away from something because we can apply that segmentation. Another example, NPS follow-up, super, super common. I know some folks on this call are already doing this. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend, sort of the standard NPS question as a closed? And then we want to know why. Why would you recommend? That's our NPS structure. An example, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you recommend Fathom to a friend or colleague? That's our closed-ended question. What's one change we could make that would make it more likely that you recommend Fathom? And then we're going to split and take the 9, 10 and say, what's the most important thing that we keep the same so you feel confident in recommending Fathom? So here's an example of how we use the close to create segmentation. And then we apply just a slight tweak on the open-ended why. And again, we're really focusing that why. We're not saying, why do you feel that way about the NPS? We're saying, what's one thing we could change that would make it more likely you recommend Fathom? That's the specific why. What do we need to change? What are you dissatisfied about? Okay, how are we going to analyze this one? Again, we're going to code the open-ended question for themes, for detailed themes. We're always going to do that. That's always going to show up as number 1. Then we're going to create our promoter, our passive, and our detractor segments. And we're going to explore the open-ended why by those segments. And I've thrown in here for fun, you don't need to capture all of this because I'm going to send you the deck afterwards, an alternate single follow-up question. So if you're like, sample split, too much for us, we want to just keep things simpler, I want it to always be the same. Well, we could use something like, what feature, experience, or consideration causes doubt about recommending Fathom to a friend or colleague? That's going to work across the board for the NPS follow-up. So another example of using a why question that doesn't read as why, it doesn't have the word why in there, in order to help us focus, and then combining, again, just a couple of questions, really tight little battery that's going to work well over and over again to be able to give us insights that we can continuously make sense of. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. So our third principle, we want to minimize bias by starting broad and getting narrower and narrower in focus. I said, and with good questions, because obviously that part matters too. So start broad and get narrower in focus throughout the survey design, throughout the battery as an overall principle. There's obviously a gazillion forms of bias, and many of you know about lots of them, and we're always, all of us, working on minimizing in our design all the time. We're going to focus today on a few that make mixed methodology sort of particularly trickier, that are extra important in this context. Priming is the one we've already talked about the most, order or recency bias, also acquiescence and social desirability. All right, here we go. Oh, this is supposed to tell you about, oh, there we go. There's a fun little click there. All right, so priming, also order bias. This is when the order of a question affects responses to subsequent questions. My goal here was to have a cute little child wake you up with a no, no, no about halfway through our time, and that's exactly where we are. So good job for us. That's because we don't want to do priming whenever possible, or we at least want to know exactly what we are doing. A couple examples of this, a multiple choice question can prime a set of ideas, concepts, themes before an open-ended question. Obviously, we want to avoid that whenever possible. A question that asks about experience or identity, that asks someone to sort of recall and put themselves in that position, is going to prime them to continue to be in that social identity for future responses. And they're going to continue to answer through that lens. So really thinking about how the order is going to affect the open-ended responses in particular. This obviously affects closed-ended as well, but is especially important in open-ended. How do we minimize priming in those mixed methodology instruments then? So clearly the most important thing is to ask the most important exploratory questions earliest. It's really the most important consideration most of the time. And if you play around with these, and we've run a lot of experiments around this, it's really, really powerful. The difference between priming with a set of options and then asking an open-ended question versus just asking what's coming up for you as a free association is really, really different. And both of them can be valuable. So I think this is the other piece that's really important to remember about this. And this is what I mean when I say be intentional about ordering. It's not necessarily not valuable. It's just different kinds of information. So if you really want to know what associations are present for somebody when I ask them this question without giving them any other information, it's important not to give them any other information first. If you want to know, okay, I've given you a set of options, I have primed you around these things, now what's going on for you, what's sticky, that's fine. Just know that that's what you're doing. We want to be intentional about ordering. We just talked about that with the idea of concepts, but the same thing applies to social identity or associations. Anything that we have given somebody in the survey earlier before an open-ended question is more likely to affect or to show up in how they're responding to the open-ended question. So really thinking about that. And when you're concerned a question or a piece of content may have a priming effect, you can randomize the order in which the respondents will see it. Pretty simple fix, but also worth thinking about. Again, we're going to come back to examples. So here's a key purchase consideration example. This also works really well for brand association. On the left, again, we have that battery structure, 4 questions, 4 sort of purposes to the question, and then the example on the left. So this is a funnel structure. I love this structure. It's super fun, something we experimented with a ton. We've done it around sort of candidate qualities. We've done it with brand association. We've done with purchase consideration. The first thing is asking about all of the things or association. I'm calling this the openest of the question. The next thing is asking then, okay, what's the most important thing or association? And what we found is that if you give people space to tell you all the things, you actually get a more sort of rich and robust set of answers around the most important thing, because you give them time, just a half beat to think through, okay, what are all the things? Okay, now what's the most important thing? You could also swap out that second question for a multiple choice option. What are all the things? Okay, which of these things that we've already decided and known are important to us as a closed-ended? And then we're going to do a why follow-up, an open why question. So an example. What are all the things you consider when choosing a dish soap? The openest of openest. We might get scent and price and quality and availability in my local store, all of the things. Which of those things is the most important to you in deciding which dish soap to purchase? So we've got that specific what open, that's that why, that specific what open. The next one we've got, or we could swip this out, which of the following things is the most important? And maybe we've already got a prefab list and we want to use that as a multiple choice. Now tell me something about you to help me understand why that's the most important thing to you. If you haven't seen this question before, that probably means you haven't been on one of our webinars before, because we use this question a lot. It's a really, really interesting and powerful narrative elicitation. Tell me something about you to help me understand why, whatever it is that you're curious about. So here we've started with, what are all the things you consider? What's the most important thing? So there's your sort of like your decision thing, your most important thing. Okay, now tell me about why. Tell me something about you to help me understand why that's the most important thing to you. Here you're going to get stories around people's personal experiences, their identity, their position, their financial constraints, their availability with cars, whether they have to carry heavy grocery bags, all of the things that are personal to them that really do drive decision making. Fun analysis to understand this what and why, this funnel structure. So again, we're going to code the open-ended questions for detailed themes. Here's a fun little survey work for you. We're then going to create closed-ended segments from Q2 themes, that specific what. So the most important, we're going to narrow that down to closed-ended segments. That way, we can segment to the most important attribute around the why, right? We can segment, we can cut the tell me something about you to help me understand why to which of these things is the most important to you, regardless of whether we've used a closed-ended multiple choice structure or whether we've used an open-ended, which is most important, and then created segments based on those themes. We can also segment all of this data to demographic or persona and explore the distribution of openest and the specific whats and the whys by all of those sort of key drivers for you, personas that you know are really important to you, demographics that you're particularly interested in getting to, or who are behaving in ways that you really need to understand. We can cut all of this data by those things. Sorry, my dog is barking at something. Sprocket. Good dog. All right. Second structure around biases, second set of things and principles we want to think about around biases. Go lie down. You are a good dog. Just lie down. Nobody needs your help. We're going to talk here about a couple of principles that are going to help with three biases: acquiescence, social desirability, and consistency. Acquiescence being when the inclination to be agreeable results in a lot of yes answers. People like to be agreeable, and so it's easier to say yes sometimes. When the desire, the second one, social desirability, is when the desire to be socially acceptable skews the answer away from true feelings. So instead of telling you how I really feel, I tell you an answer that I think you're going to like. And then last one, consistency bias, is when the drive to be consistent in your response, to be a consistent and logical human, biases how someone responds so that it aligns with an earlier answer. So if I told you X earlier, even though we're actually like complicated and mushy people and we have all sorts of conflicting experiences within us, I align my answer later in the survey with that answer because I want to appear logical and consistent, even though we all know all humans are not that. So how do we minimize those biases? Again, ask the open-ended questions early. Same principle. Avoid questions that suggest a preferred answer. This is going to be really familiar from anything that is any kind of survey. So give equal space to the for and the against, the positive, negative, the agree or disagree in the framing of both your open and your closed-ended questions. A lot of these principles apply to both and are especially important with your open-ended questions. Again, make really good use of randomization and sample splits or other logic to minimize the bias that might show up in your open-ended questions. And know that consistency bias is a thing. Make sure that not just the open-ended questions are going early, but also the most important, I'm going to call it like truth, comes out early in the survey, right? Whatever you may give people space to anchor on, because we humans, we anchor on things. So an example, positive and negative attributes, associations, and sentiment. So the battery, the example battery, again, these consistent batteries we can use over and over in multiple structures to get to different things. This is an association map battery. So we're going to start with a closed-ended position or support question. Then we're going to ask a best thing about the concept question and a worst thing about the concept question. Here you can see the suggestion to randomize, the way we talked about using randomization to minimize bias. And then we're going to ask an emotion. What emotion best describes your feeling? We'll look at that in a second. Taking that and bringing it to life. Do you agree or disagree? Giving equal space to agree and disagree that President Biden should be the next president of the United States. 4 points, strongly agree to strongly disagree. No matter how you feel about Biden, what do you think are the best things that he has done as president? No matter how you feel about Biden, what do you think are the worst things he's done as president? We're going to randomize those. We're going to give equal space to best and worst. We're also going to give the participants space to say up front their position, agree or disagree, so that they can have more space. This is almost the opposite of what we talk about in a lot of places, more space to be open to the idea that they might have done good things and bad things because they've already told us whether they like or dislike that person. And then last thing we're going to do, what emotion best describes how you feel when you think about President Biden being reelected in 2024? I know a lot of folks are always looking for sentiment. We want to get sentiment out of our open-ended text. We want to get sentiment out of our open-ended responses. We have done hundreds and hundreds of tests on sentiment. Of course, you can get sentiment out of the Fathom platform, but what we have found is that you get much richer and more accurate data by simply asking people how they feel. And the question that works best for that is what emotion best describes how you feel when you think about X, Y, or Z. So here we have agreement, we have the why, which is that open-ended, and then emotion. How do you feel about that? And at the bottom, we've got some fun analysis to understand association and sentiment. Always code the open-ended questions for detailed themes. Then we're going to segment on position, and we're going to analyze open-ended best and worst for those who like and dislike. We can look for similarities, we can look for differences, we can look for overlap, that area that's going to work well for everybody, all sorts of fun analysis we can do there. Then we're going to segment on position, and we're going to analyze the open-ended sentiment. And we're going to apply that to an emotional activation framework. Really, really important to know how activated people are in their emotions in order to understand who may or may not take action. So we're going to be able to use that data for that. And then we're going to segment on metadata, demographics, geography, voter file match, any of those sorts of things. And we can analyze best, worst, and emotion across the board there. So again, really thinking ahead of time around what it is that we want to analyze, who we need to understand, maybe swing voters, people who are likely to support and activated, people who are likely to not support and activated. We can create each of those segments because we've done a good job with just 4 questions, a simple battery, and the ability to intersect all of those things. All right, how are we doing for time? Oh, we're doing so good. Awesome. Thing number 4, be specific. Principle, not a thing. Principle number 4. Be specific and focused with your open-ended questions. I am not going to spend a ton of time on this because we have an entire webinar on it. It's on the site. You can always get it. But I will just reiterate a couple of key points and apparently leave an extra hanging bullet point at the bottom. Well-crafted open-ended questions are really enjoyable for the respondent, and they're strategic for you. And as a bonus, they're a pain for fraudsters. And so I think one of the things that's really sort of in zeitgeist, for good reason, it's important right now, is respondent experience and data quality. And really well-crafted open-ended questions are actually going to help with both of those things. And so what do we mean when we say a well-crafted open-ended question in these mixed methodology instruments? The first is something we've talked about over and over. Be specific and focused in your question in order to support your goal. Not why do you feel that way, but what can we do to improve? What experience did you have that led you to feel that way? What, in order to understand why. A simple red flag that we sort of use is that if you have any version of, let's just see what comes up for people in response to why that open-ended question, you maybe want to take a double check and have a second look at that open-ended question and see if you can make it more specific. That's not just about giving you useful data. It's also about giving the respondent an enjoyable experience, a question they can answer meaningfully for you. And if you do that for them, they do give you meaningful, rich data. That means you're going to have a higher response rate, a larger N size, less drop-off. They're going to have a better experience and the data is going to be richer. Avoid ambiguity. So here, I don't mean ambiguous as in, just tell me how you're feeling. I mean, can the question be interpreted multiple ways? It often can. Pre-test it if you can to see if there's anything of, oh, I didn't know you could interpret the question that way, but yeah, you certainly can. That response makes it challenging now to understand what's going on. So avoid that ambiguity. Kind of the same as the be specific and focused, but also just like, can it be interpreted more than one way? If it can, it will be. Watch out for double barrels. If you have been on any call with me, I have probably talked about this. A double-barreled question is when you ask more than one thing. Sometimes they're triple-barreled. What is the thing that you like best about dish soap and why? When was the last time that you had that experience and who were you with? You've asked 2 different things. In the responses, it's really hard to interpret through text analytics or any other sort of processing, whether you're using something like Fathom or doing that yourself, what corresponds to what. And your N size is all off because some people are going to have responded to one part of the question, what? Some people are going to have responded to another part of the question, why? Some people are going to respond to both of them. It is hard to map what anybody's talking about, but also now your N size is off on all of the things. So one question per question. And then use those other comments sparingly, the sort of open other boxes. Again, you are going to have low representativeness, low N size, and not a great respondent experience because you aren't giving them the clarity to know how to respond in a way that's really valuable to you. A simple framework for that is that we want to stay in the focused, open, sweet spot, that middle section. Too narrow up top, you might as well just ask a multiple choice. Do you like cats? Yes, no. That doesn't need to be an open-ended question. Too broad, that's what we've talked about more. Respondents don't get the clarity from you in order to provide you meaningful information, and they know it, they feel it, it doesn't feel good, and it also doesn't give you good data. So focused open, that middle section gives clarity for the respondent so they can give you a nice, robust answer, which is going to yield that really lovely response rate and really excellent, rich data for you, exactly what you're looking for. An example of this one, this is a bit of a bigger battery. This is a concept map structure, and it's something that we've used probably hundreds of times to be able to understand different concepts. A concept can be literally anything. When I use the term concept, it could be an issue, it could be a product, it could be a human, it could be an experience. anything that you can ask a question about is a concept. And so this concept map structure, lots of ways to adapt it, but this battery starts with issue importance, so concept importance, and then position related to the concept. Both of those are closed-ended questions. And then why do you have that position? There's your open-ended why, and again, unlikely to actually see the word why, but maybe. The open emotion, you're going to see we're reusing the same question. We talk about that reusing, that repeatability. And then what specifically? The open what. So this structure holds together really well when you're looking to understand how people, to get a picture, a map of how people are relating to a concept. Let's bring it to life with an example. How important is an employee healthcare program to you personally? 4-point scale, not at all important to very important. How satisfied or dissatisfied are you with our current employee healthcare program? 4-point scale, very dissatisfied to very satisfied. Now we've got that lovely intersection already of importance and satisfaction. We can start to cross those things when we're creating our segments later. Tell me something about you and your experience. This structure is probably starting to look familiar with our healthcare program to help me understand why you feel that way. We're going to get beautiful narrative. We're going to understand people's family structures. We're going to understand the specific considerations. We're going to understand their financial considerations. We're going to understand the medical priorities that are most important to them because we're asking about them and their experience. We're going to get narrative in there, and we're going to be able to cut it by those top 2 questions. What emotion best describes how you feel about our employee healthcare program? You could drop that question if it doesn't feel particularly important in this particular sort of example, but it's generally part of our concept map structure. And then what specific change to our healthcare program would make the biggest difference to you personally? So now we're asking, again, instead of saying why, why that, we're asking, okay, what would need to change? And that's going to help us to understand what the challenges are. When we look at the ways that we might cut this, I talked through that as we were going. So just a couple of notes at the bottom. Issue importance and position enables us to be able to combine those variables for the open-ended analysis. So we can combine, maybe it's really important to me and I'm highly dissatisfied. That might be a really, really important segment for us to understand, okay, what's going on for those folks? Let's look at their open why and their open what. How can we make change for them? Emotion is going to give that critical information into activation. Again, like this is a concept where maybe that's important or maybe not, up to you to decide. You can always pull it out. And then open what requires adaptation in contexts where respondents might not know the options. So here, what specific change to our healthcare program might make a ton of sense. But if you're asking about a government policy, folks might not be able to tell you like what specific policy should be enacted. And instead, you might want to focus on the desired outcome for the respondent, or even sub in some multiple choice options here. So a way there to adapt to ensure, again, that we're focusing on a respondent experience and that people can answer meaningfully. If we ask them for information that they literally aren't capable of providing, then we're not going to get really rich insights from those open-ended questions. So another sort of important check when you're doing that kind of design to make sure, like, are the people who I'm asking this question to capable of providing that answer? Is it reasonable for me to expect them to have that information? And if not, maybe I need to focus on a slightly different structure. What's the desired outcome for you? What needs to change in your life? And then it's up to us to figure out how to make that happen. Okay, last principle, build and test enduring formats and batteries that you can reuse and adapt. Hopefully that is starting to come to life just throughout this webinar, as we've looked at a number of examples of exactly that, enduring formats and batteries that you can reuse and adapt. And you can even see that really similar questions are being popped into each of those. A couple of ways that you might want to go about doing that, to create a bank of open-ended questions and batteries, and test them and refine them and reuse them and share them with the team. When I talk about testing, that could happen in 2 ways. Obviously, it can happen in live surveys. It also can be really useful when you're really trying to refine those batteries that are going to work super well for your use case, and that you're going to start to say like, okay, cool, we're going to use these over and over, to try a bunch of different versions of them with low sample. You're not looking for, really, really high response rate and to have sort of confidence and validity. You're looking to understand, am I clear? Am I priming anything? Which of these provides the most robust answer that is going to be the most useful and actionable most often? And so you can do some of that testing, low samples, multiple ways of structuring, and start to refine what's going to work really well for you. AI can assist with some of your design challenges. So some of the things that we've seen people starting to do a lot is to prompt. So you are a survey respondent. What are all the ways you could interpret this question when we were talking about interpretability? Can it be interpreted multiple ways? It's a great way to get an answer to this. You are a research manager whose job is to identify bias in survey design, criticize this design. Ultimately, you hold the pen, and that's super, super important. We can have a whole separate webinar about why we believe that that is always important, but really useful tools there to help you in that journey. We're really excited right now about, and a bunch of our innovation and testing about interactive surveys that are using chat prompts. We will at some point in the near future have a whole webinar on designing those to ensure that you are able to analyze and make sense of that data. At this point, what I'll say is, just as you are probably also experimenting with that, to be thinking about analysis when you're building the design. What kinds of limitations do you want to put on the prompt to ensure that the prompts are giving you useful data? Where do you need to be able to segment the prompts to be able to ensure that you can have consistency in the topics of the questions? Some of those principles to ensure that you are really getting the most out of sort of qual at scale, out of mixed methodology, that you have robust samples that are talking about a similar topic through that survey design process. So we'll talk more about that later, but it's one of the areas where we're innovating, testing, and we'll certainly share as we are learning, and some early principles that we're seeing that are important as you're probably innovating as well. We're also seeing a ton of success leveraging tools like Fathom to identify themes from video transcriptions and some of the longer form qual. One of the key things there, again, is thinking through the analysis planning from the get-go and adhering to that concept of focused opens. So again, a lot of the principles that we've talked about throughout really apply here just as much. Are you asking a specific question that is going to ensure that people are all answering in a relatively similar way, so that when you are analyzing the data, you're getting answers to the same question? How much data is useful for you in that space? Really thinking through that as you're setting up those design structures, and always happy to hop on a call and talk through those things. One final example that is actually neither of those things, but that I realized I hadn't included, is an ad or message test. And so there's the structure again on the left and an example on the right. So we can also use these similar sort of battery structures and do a pre-exposure metric, then a message exposure, then that open emotion question, really understanding what or why something's sticky, position, and why that position. So a really similar structure to what we were looking at before, taking that into the example. We've got a pre-exposure metric, something like open association or closed position. A message, that could be an ad, it could be something that somebody's reading, it could be a meme, it could be a concept for a product, whatever it is you want to expose to. And then a series of questions. So what emotion best describes how you feel after watching that? What specific part of the ad made you feel that way? We're getting the stickiness, the resonance through an open what. Your post exposure position, a similar metric, and then what, if anything, about what you just saw shifted your point of view even a little bit. So again, really similar. You can see questions and structures, but pulling it together into a slightly different way. So coming back to the very beginning, ending where we started with 10 minutes left, principles for excellent mixed methodology design that set you up to leverage AI. You want to design your research goals and your analysis plan in mind. You want to combine open and closed-ended questions for really powerful analysis. You want to minimize bias by starting broad and getting narrow in your focus. You want to be specific and focused with those open-ended questions, and you want to build batteries and questions that you can reuse and adapt over and over.